Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on preparing for ISO 14001-2026, strengthening your environmental management system. Dana, can we move to the next slide, please? Before we start, I'd like to go through some housekeeping. All participants are muted during the webinar. The session will be recorded and we'll be sharing the recording with all of you after the webinar. You can submit your question through the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. Our speaker for today is Ms. Dana Grace B. Rutilla. She's our client manager for sustainability at BSI, based in Manila, Philippines. Dana is a registered chemist with over 13 years of experience. She is highly skilled in sustainability reporting requirements, and her expertise even extends to other various management systems such as quality, laboratory management, anti-bribery, and environmental management. Her diverse background encompasses role in business development, consultancy, and compliance across leading organizations across sector, equipping her with comprehensive understanding of sustainability impacts. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speaker for today, Ms. Dana Grace.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So, we're here to talk about how we're going to prepare for ISO 14001 2026, which is expected to be published this April 2026. Okay. So, in this session or in this webinar, we'll begin by walking through the expected key changes introduced in ISO FDIS 14001 and more importantly, the reasons behind them. While ISO 14001 has always focused on helping organizations manage and continually improve their environmental performance, the 2026 revision strengthens its relevance in today's rapidly evolving environmental landscape. After we have understood the changes, we'll move to the practical implications for organizations that are transitioning to the expected revisions of ISO 14001. And then we'll walk through the recommended transition timeline when organizations are expected to transition, what the transition window will look like, and how to plan ahead to avoid bottlenecks. Okay. So let's talk about why ISO 14001 is getting an update for 2026 and why it actually makes a lot of sense. First are the environmental challenges we're dealing with today are way more complex than they used to be. We're talking climate impacts, tighter regulations, resource shortages, you name it. These things aren't theoretical anymore. They're actually affecting our day to day operations and long term business planning. So, the update basically strengthens the standard to help organizations stay ahead of these risks instead of scrambling after the fact. There's more emphasis on climate resilience, risk based thinking, and looking at impacts across the full life cycle. Next is there's the push for better alignment with Annex SL or the high level structure. ISO's been trying to harmonize all their management system standards. So ISO 9001, ISO 45001, 27001, and the rest have a consistent structure. The 2026 update or revision tightens that alignment even more. Another big driver is the clarified requirements. So this standard clarifies some of the requirements. Over the years, users kept asking for clearer guidance, especially around life cycle thinking, identifying aspects and emergency preparedness. Yeah. So the revision cleans that up. Less ambiguity, clearer expectations, and more consistent interpretation, whether you're in manufacturing, services, or any other industry. And finally, the update responds to the growing demand for sustainability and transparency. Our regulators, our investors, even customers, they all now want visibility into how organizations manage your environmental impacts. ESG reporting now has become mainstream. So the new version of ISO 14001 puts more focus on accountability, data quality, and transparent management reviews. The idea is that your EMS shouldn't just meet compliance, it should support broader sustainability commitments. So this is where you are, this is what you're looking for right now. So what are the changes? The 2026 revision isn't a major overhaul, really. It's an evolution designed to keep ISO 14001 relevant, practical, and aligned with global challenges and expectations. These enhancements help organizations remain resilient, credible, and forward looking. Okay. Please note that everything we will discuss for this hour is based on ISO FDIS 14001. ISO 14001 2026 is expected for publication in April 2026. Okay. So let's move into one of the foundational updates in ISO 14001 2026, which sits right at the start of the standard: context of the organization. This section is critical because it shapes your entire EMS by defining your environmental realities and stakeholder expectations your organization must respond to. In the 2015 version of ISO 14001, Clause 4.1 already required organizations to consider environmental conditions that could influence or be influenced by their activities. The 2024 amendment, or Amendment 1 2024, strengthened this by explicitly adding climate change as a required consideration. Clause 4.2 was likewise expanded to acknowledge that interested parties may have expectations that are specifically tied to climate related issues. In the newest ISO 14001 revision, as stated in ISO FDs 14001, these updates are not only retained but broadened. Clause 4 now will now require organizations to consider a wider range of internal and external environmental issues, which includes pollution levels, resource availability, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. Clause 4.2 mirrors this expansion by recognizing that stakeholders increasingly expect accountability across these broader environmental themes beyond just climate change. So the 2026 update actually elevates the context analysis from focusing mainly on climate change to a richer, more holistic environmental picture. This ensures that you are preparing your EMS to respond to real world environmental challenges that are rapidly evolving. It also strengthens your link between environmental management, sustainability strategy, and stakeholder expectations. So, as we have said, no, there are five key environmental conditions, which are pollution levels, natural resource availability, climate change, biodiversity, and ecosystem health, that were emphasized because these five forms the basis for understanding your environmental context. So when we talk about pollution levels, it refers to contaminants in air, water, or land, including emissions, effluents, waste, and noise that may impact or be impacted by the organization. Natural resources cover materials, water, energy, and minerals essential to operations. Climate change includes both your contribution to climate impacts and also the risks that are posed by extreme weather, temperature changes, and the new decarbonization requirements. Biodiversity concerns the organisms and ecosystems that may be affected by our operations. Ecosystem health looks at the overall stability and resilience of ecosystems that support or are influenced by the organization. So, together, these factors actually help our organization develop a comprehensive, forward looking understanding of our environmental risks and opportunities, which ensures our strategic planning, our objectives, remain aligned with evolving environmental conditions. So another revision or an update of ISO 14001 um, 2026 is the strengthening of the treatment of risks and opportunities, which is actually an essential part of planning an effective environmental management system. In ISO 14001 2015, 6.1.1 or clause 6.1.1 required organizations to identify your environmental risks and opportunities using inputs from your context of organization, from your interested parties, as well as with your scope. And your documented information are maintained and retained to control these elements. In the ISO FDIS 14001, these requirements this requirement is reorganized into a new subclause, which is 614 risks and opportunities, and has more explicit language now. The standard now clearly states that planning must consider internal and external issues, stakeholder expectations, and EMS scope, reinforcing that these three are now mandatory inputs, not optional ones. Another major change is the shift in documentation requirements. Instead of requiring organizations to maintain or retain documented information on risks and opportunities, the standard now requires that this information are made available. This places stronger emphasis on accessibility and practical use rather than simply keeping records. Risks and opportunity information must be now easy for auditors, decision makers, and relevant stakeholders to access and use. Okay? As we move deeper into the updates, I want to bring us to one of the most foundational parts of ISO 14001, which is the determination of your environmental aspects. This is really where your EMS begins because everything you plan, you control, or you improve ties back to the aspects and impacts you have identified. In the 2015 version, Clause 6.1.2 already required you to identify your aspects related to your activities, products, and services, anything you could control or influence. It has also emphasized the need to look at these aspects through a life cycle perspective, reminding organizations that impacts don't start and end within your fences, no? In the 2026 update, it will keep this intent but clarified what life cycle perspective means. The revised note now lists specific stages to consider from raw material acquisition, design production, up to final disposal. This already removed the ambiguity and ensures that organizations now evaluate not only on site impacts, but the broader environmental footprint of their decisions. And another thing, this isn't anymore just conceptual. It already directly links to Clause 8.1, where operational control are expected to reflect these identified life cycle considerations. So it's not enough to recognize the impact. The organizations must show how they are managing it. So, if you would ask me how to prepare for this, well, you first have to look at your environmental aspect and impact register. So, many of the organizations will find that your existing registers focus heavily on internal operations. With the new clarification, it's important to revisit whether all relevant life cycle stages were represented and whether your significance criteria still make sense in this broader context. Another thing, you might need to prepare documented evidence showing how life cycle stages were considered. You don't need to have a formal life cycle assessment. But it does require clarity. So your process maps, product flow diagrams, supplier assessments, or even simple decision notes will help demonstrate that you have gone through the thought process. And finally, this update naturally widens the circle of involvement. No? Life cycle thinking touches procurement, design, logistics, and even after sales functions. So, organizations should prepare by engaging these teams, making sure they understand where their decision influence environmental aspects and how they can contribute to better controls. So let's keep going with clause 6.1.2 and look at what's new in the 14,001 FDIS. In the 2015 version, organizations had to think about changes, abnormal conditions, and what the standard called reasonably foreseeable emergency situations. Okay, so these are what you look for when identifying environmental aspects. Most companies got used to that wording and built their registered around those categories. But in the upcoming update of ISO 14001, there's a small change in wording that actually makes a difference. Instead of focusing on reasonably foreseeable emergency situations, the standard now asks the organizations to identify potential emergency situations, especially those that could have an environmental impact. So that shift from foreseeable to potential actually widens the scope. It pushes the organizations to think not just about what has happened before, but what could realistically happen as the business grows. It introduces new technologies or maybe change a process or launch new products and services. The update also reinforces that we still need to consider abnormal conditions and plan changes. But and these moments often create the biggest environmental risks, so you can't overlook them. Okay. So what does this mean for us as we prepare for transition? So again, revisit your aspect impact register, especially the emergency section. No? You likely need to add more scenarios now that the standard focuses on potential emergencies. You might want to think about natural events, equipment failures, chemical spills, or even cyber incidents that could affect your environmental controls. Second, update your environmental risk assessment. Don't rely only on past experience. Look at new materials, new operations, and new technologies that could introduce fresh risks. Third, make sure your documentation shows how you identified these potential emergencies. Whether you used workshops, brainstormings, hazard ID tools, or cross functional reviews, we would want to see the thinking behind it. And finally, update your emergency preparedness and response plans so that they reflect these expanded scenarios. That may mean revisiting your procedures, training people, or communicating with the departments or stakeholders who need to be aware. Okay. So, continuing our journey through clause 6.1.2, we now move into the third part of the environmental aspects requirements. And here, the focus shifts to determining significance using established criteria and ensuring transparency through documented information. In the 2015 version, you were already required to use your established criteria to determine significance. So you have your scoring systems, your risk matrices, or other kinds of structured judgment to look at things like severity, frequency, or maybe likelihood of environmental impacts. Your companies also had to document your aspects, impacts, and the criteria used, and which ones were considered significant. In the update, of ISO 14001, the core requirement stays the same, but there are two key improvements. First, the wording is tightened. It now emphasizes determining significant environmental aspects using established criteria. It's a small change, but it reinforces that process has to be structured and defined, not just based on gut feel or informal judgment. Second, the documentation requirement shifts. Again, instead of saying information must be maintained, the standard now says it must be made available. So it's now the new term, made available. This actually fits with the broader move towards transparency. So it's not enough to have paperwork stored somewhere. The information needs to be easy to access for anyone who needs it, including auditors and internal teams. There's also a helpful update in the note. It now clearly states that the significant aspects can lead to both negative and positive environmental impacts. So that's actually a good reminder for us that these aren't just about risks. There are also opportunities like projects that improve efficiency or reduce emissions. Okay? So, what should organizations focus on as they transition? First, take again a fresh look at your significance criteria. Make sure that they're clear, applied consistently, and reflect the updated environmental perspective, such as looking at biodiversity, resource availability, and ecosystem health. Second, streamline your documentation. Since information must be made available, your registers, criteria, and significance determinations should be organized, traceable, and easy for people to find. Third, make sure the right people know what your significant aspects are. Communication matters, so this could include your operations team, your procurement team, your maintenance team, design team, and logistics team. And finally, make sure your significant aspects tie back to your objectives. You have operational controls for them. And also, it's tied back to your risks and opportunities. We would want everything to connect, really, because it's easier to demonstrate conformity and show how environmental priorities guide daily decisions. Okay? So, we're done with 612. We move to planning of changes, no? This is actually one of the standout improvements in the 2026 revision. It now has a stronger focus on planning and managing change. Though change has always been part of ISO 14001, in the 2015 version, it was scattered across different clauses. So it's in aspects, it's in communication, it's in documented information, it's in operations, audits, management review, and corrective action. It was mentioned everywhere actually, but never pulled together into one clear requirement. So organizations knew they have to manage change, but the expectations felt a bit implied. In ISO FD's 14001, they fixed that by creating a brand new subclause, and that is clause 6.3, planning of changes, which actually aligns with ISO 9001. So this finally brings structure and consistency to change management within your EMS. It moves change from being an assumed practice to an explicit requirement. Clause 6.3 basically says that whenever change is needed, it must be planned and it must be managed. Simple, but powerful. It sets clearer responsibilities and encourages organizations to think ahead instead of reacting after something has already gone wrong. The note that follows the clause is also really helpful. It reminds us that the need for change can come from anywhere. So it can come from internal events like incidents, new technology, redesigns, or expansions, or maybe external factors like new regulations or stakeholder expectations. In other words, organizations must stay alert, and adaptable because environmental requirements are always evolving. So, how do we prepare for this? First, check if you have a formal change management process. Many companies have informal practices, but now ISO 14001 will require or will expect something more structured and documented. Second, make sure that your plan changes, whether may it be operational, technological, structural, or procedural, are assessed for environmental impacts before they're implemented. This might mean updating your procedures or approval workflows. Third is you might want to document how decisions around changes are made. Auditors will now expect evidence that environmental impacts were considered during the planning stage, not just after a problem occurs. And finally, make sure cross functional teams know their part in managing change. So, this includes your engineering team, your procurement team, operation, maintenance, and compliance. No? You now all need to recognize when their decisions trigger environmental conditions. With clause 6.3, it strengthens an organization's ability to anticipate risks, prevent negative impacts, and make sure change leads to improvement, not new environmental problems. Okay. So, another key update in the 2026 revision is about external providers. Under the 2015 version, Clause 8.1 used the term outsourced processes, which caused a lot of confusion. Some organizations thought it only meant fully outsourced work, while others weren't sure if contractors or certain suppliers were counted. The new revision fixes that. So they are now using a clearer phrase externally provided processes, products, or services. It's a small wording change, but it's much easier to understand and it lines up with the other ISO standards like 9001 and 45001. So basically, if you have someone outside your organization can affect your environmental performance and they provide processes, products, and services, they fall under this requirement. So the intent hasn't actually changed. You still need to control or influence these external providers. Okay? So you could still set environmental requirements, monitor performance, do supplier audits, or add criteria to your procurement processes. Okay? Okay. So let's move on to internal audits. This isn't actually a big change, but it's basically your EMS built-in health check. No, in the 2015 version, organizations have to plan audits by looking at things like environmental importance of processes, any changes that have happened, and results from previous audits. They also need to define the audit criteria, scope, and how the results will be reported. In ISO FD's 14001, it kept all of that, but adds a couple of helpful refinements. Sorry. First, the phrase take into consideration has been simplified to just consider. It sounds tiny, but it makes expectations clearer. It means these inputs need to genuinely influence the audit plan, not just be acknowledged. Second, the updated standard now requires an audit objective for every single audit. Okay, so this is actually a great improvement because it ensures that each audit that you will conduct in your internal audit program has a purpose, whether you're just checking compliance, checking performance, risks, or the effectiveness of controls. Okay, it also reinforced the need to define criteria and scope upfront, which aligns with good auditing practices. Okay. There is also an update in management review. This is one of the areas where ISO FDIS 14001 really sharpened the expectations. In clause 9.3 of the 2015 version, your top management already had to take a look at the list of inputs, no? Like past actions, changes in the organization, your environmental performance, and how well the EMS was working. But because the wording said these items needed to be considered, a lot of organizations treated management review like a checklist instead of a structured evidence based discussion. In the new version or in the upcoming version of ISO 14001, it says that the management review inputs shall include certain items, which means organizations must clearly show what information was actually brought into the review. It's a subtle shift, but it creates much stronger transparency and forces leadership to base decisions on complete, reliable data. Another revision also reorganizes the content into new subclauses. So 9.3.2 lays out inputs clearly, and what used to be called outputs is now named as results. Now it's renamed into results under clause 9.3.3. Okay, so it just aligned with modern ISO language and reinforces that management review isn't just a record. It's actually meant to produce real decisions, actions, and improvements. Clause 9.3.3 now also explicitly requires results like conclusions, decisions, actions, opportunities, implications are available documented information. So again, that shift from retained to be available shows ISO's push for more transparency and accessibility. Okay. So now, for the last revision, which is actually in clause 10, this is very simple. It actually talks about continual improvement, which is really the heart of ISO 14001. In the 2015 version, the clause was pretty simple. Organizations had to continually improve the EMS, but the wording was broad, and many organizations weren't always sure how to show continual improvement in a practical way. In the 14001 2026 revision, it gives this area more structure. The new clause 10.1 actually explains how continual improvement shall happen. First, by identifying opportunities for improvement, and then by actually acting on them. This makes improvement more intentional and ties it directly to earlier parts of your EMS like risks, opportunities, performance evaluation, and management review. Clause 10.2 on non-conformity and corrective action stays mostly the same, but again, there is the difference between instead of maintain and retain, it becomes documented information must be available. Okay, keeping with the standards push for transparency. So what does this look like in practice? Start by reviewing how you identify opportunities for improvement or improvement opportunities. Do they come from audits? Do they come from monitoring, from stakeholder feedback or performance data? And documented. Then check that actions taken are tracked and evaluated so you can show a full improvement cycle. Also, maybe you might want to revisit your corrective action process to make sure it focuses on preventing recurrence and strengthening controls. And finally, link your improvement back to real environmental performance, not just procedural tweaks. Okay? So those are actually just the updates or revisions in ISO 14001, which are expected to be published in April 2026. So let's now walk through the expected transition timelines for your EMS certification. Okay, please take note that this is based on the assumption that this will be published on April 2026. So the first key milestone is April 2026, which is the expected release of ISO 14001 2026. So again, everything we've discussed in today's session is based on the final draft international standard. Okay? Once published, certification bodies, auditors, and organizations will begin aligning their systems and audit programs to the updated requirements. The next major point on the timeline is October 2027. By this date, all initial and renewal ISO 14001 certifications must be issued against ISO 14001 2026. That means any organizations aiming for new certification or recertification must already have transitioned to the 2026 version. This gives organizations roughly 18 months from publication to update their systems, conduct gap assessments, train internal teams, update documentation, and undergo transition audits. And finally, we move to April 2029, which marks the end of the validity for all ISO 14001 2015 certificates. By this date, all accredited certifications under the 2015 version will either be expired or be formally withdrawn. In other words, April 2029 is the absolute last point in the cycle. After this period, only ISO 14001 2026 will be recognized as valid. So the transition period spans about 3 years from publication, but the practical transition window, especially for certification, is tighter, maybe ending in late 2027, or if you will push further, maybe February 2029. Okay, so it's important for organizations to prepare early. Okay, so many of you might ask, when can we transition? It will really depend on your certification timings. So we can begin by looking at your initial audit or recertification date. So if you've had your initial audit or recertification audit before April 2026 using ISO 14001 2015 Amendment 1 2024, you have the widest transition window. You may transition at any audit visit from April 2026 up to April 2029. So you can do it in your continuing assessment visit 1 or CAV 2 or maybe research on your certification year. Granted that your visit occurs earlier than April 2029, just to have an allowance on anything that might happen. No? If your initial audit or recertification happens after April 2026, your transition window now becomes more defined. In this case, you may transition either in your continuing assessment visit 1 or continuing assessment visit 2. Okay. Okay, you need to be transitioned before your research year, because all of the certificates that will be released from April up to October 2027 will have the final will have the expiration date on April 2029, no? Okay. So, if this year you have already completed your continuing assessment visit 1, or you have scheduled your continuing assessment visit 1 this year, you can transition during your second continuing assessment visit or maybe in your recertification year. Okay, if this year it's your CAV 2, no, and it's scheduled before October 2026, you can have your transition in your research year. Granted, it will be before October 2027, or in your CAV 1 or maybe in your CAV 2. Only if before the April 2029, maybe February, so that it will give us more allowance. Okay? If if your CAV 2 was scheduled after October 2026, you have no choice but to transition next year, October 2027. Okay? So that's you have a more limited time then. Okay? But again, if you are competitive and want to be ahead of the pack and um you don't want to join in the rush of the transition audits by 2029 or by 2028, you may transition this year to right after publication. Well, not right after, but once we've conducted, it's now okay to transition, but we can transition this year. Okay. So before we close, let's summarize the key changes in ISO 14001 using the mnemonic clear progress. So remember these changes as you prepare. So C is for content expansion. The standard now broadens environmental context to include climate change, pollution, biodiversity, and natural resource conditions. L is for life cycle perspective. There is now clear guidance on reviewing all product and service stages when identifying aspects. E is for emergency preparedness. So from foreseeable emergencies, it has now shifted to potential emergency situations, which has now expanded preparedness expectations. A is for aspects strengthened, which is the criteria for determining significant aspects are more explicit and documentations now be made available. R is for risks and opportunities. This area is now moved to its own subclause 614 with clearer, more structured requirements. Moving on into progress, P is for planning of changes. So it now requires a formal planned approach to managing change. R is for review inputs. It shall now it has now changed to a stronger phrase with shall include. O is for outsourced to externally provided. So the terminology broadens to externally provided processes, products, and services, better aligning with Annex SL. G is for governance through audits. Each internal audit must now have its defined audit objective. R is from results. Is results from outputs. Management review outputs are now called results, reinforcing clarity. E is for environmental priorities. So it now wants you to look at climate resiliency, pollution, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. S is for systematic improvement. Continual improvement is now strengthened in the standard. And S is strengthened documentation. The shift from maintain, retain to made available enhances transparency and accessibility throughout the EMS. So this is just a mnemonic, no, so that we can easily remember what are the changes. And as we close our session, I want to emphasize that ISO FDIS 14001 represents an important evolution of the environmental management system. The changes aren't actually a complete overhaul, but they are intentional steps towards stronger clarity, accountability, and environmental resilience. By expanding context, strengthening aspects, refining risk requirements, and formalizing change management, the updated standard ensures organizations can now better respond to environmental challenges and global expectations. Again, remember everything we've discussed today is based on the ISO FDIS 14001, which is expected to be a published standard in April 2026. Now is the ideal time to start reviewing your EMS, refreshing your documentation, and engaging key teams so that your transition is smooth and strategic. Okay? Thank you for joining today's session. We hope this gives you clarity and confidence as you begin preparing for your ISO 14001 2026 transition. So, if you want to know more, we have our training courses on ISO 14001 changes on demand course as well as the 1 day training. So you may scan the QR code to know the dates or schedule dates for this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dana, for our insightful sharing. Dana, we have a few questions received from our participants, so please stay online.
Okay.
All right, one of the questions received is the first one is, can you give examples on how climate change can affect a corporate organization, one that just renting a space, for example?
Climate change, so it isn't really about physical impacts. It can actually affect our operations as well. I would just want to share with you, here in the Philippines, there has been an increasing heat index, no, for quite some time now, that now even schools and government offices had to cut classes or suspend classes or suspend government work because of the high heat index. And this is actually an effect of climate change. So it's not just about operations, it's not just about your physical locations. Even those kind of things, it affects our organizations as well.
Thank you, Dana. There's another question. How does transition affect organization long-term sustainability commitment and ESG goals? What is the next step for organization?
Okay. So for this transition for ISO 14001, if you're very familiar with ESG and also the wider sustainability commitments, especially UN SDGs, you will notice once you see the new standard that it actually aligns, especially with reporting standards such as GRI, because ISO 14001 now asks you to look at your impacts on biodiversity, which is actually part of the reporting standards as well. It now actually asks you to look at your climate resilience, um, your impact on natural resources, no, not just the pollution levels and so on and so forth. So that's why the ISO 14001 2026 had more specific wordings on this. Okay.
All right, we'll move on to the third question. Can we update EMS documents to ensure all required records are available as documented information under the new terminology?
Yes, you can. You can update your EMS document so that it will be easier for posterity as well. Now, for future generations, if or the other batches that will come in, they will understand now that it needs to be made available rather than just maintain and retain.
I'll probably skip some of the question because we do have a lot, and I'll pick a few more.
Mhm.
Okay. If an organization is going to implement ISO 14001 in 2026, should it follow the 14001 2026 or the previous version? I think this one was covered in your transition
Yeah.
timeline just now. It was really clear. But I'm not sure whether there's any other concern or consideration that our audience should be looking at.
Yep. Actually, for when you will transition, it will be up to you as long as it follows what the timings that I have set. Always remember, by October 2027, there will be no new certificates that will be released under the 2015 version. So that's one. So if your research will fall beyond October 2027, you already know that you won't be able to recertify against ISO 14001 2015 anymore. And then also, you have to keep in mind that all of the certificates that will be issued under ISO 14001 beyond April 2026, it will have an expiry of until April 2029. So from there, knowing those information, you may now plan out on when you would want to have your transition audit. Um, So if you feel like if you're going to have your transition, if you're going to have an audit this September or August 2026, and you feel like you're not yet ready to transition, you can do next year. No? But again, it will be up to you. There are some organizations that are a bit competitive, so they want to get to be the first, no? So I hope it comes from BSI.
All right, there's another question. Is planning of change clause, can that be integrated to same clauses in 45,001 and ISO 9001?
Yes, of course. You can all that's the beauty of the high level structure and this update. It actually makes integration of different management systems easier. Just as long as you have to always remember that when ISO 14001 talks about and changes that will impact our environmental performance. So you can integrate them.
All right. I think this question, will there be a stage one and stage two during the certification audit? I think that question it was also something you shared during the presentation. It
It
should be
will, yeah,
still
it
stage one,
will,
stage
yeah.
two.
No, it will depend on the timing of your transition audit. So if it's a recertification there might be a stage one, but if you conduct your transition during your continuing assessment visit, it will really depend on your current performance, EMS performance. So it will be based on the recommendation of your certification body, but usually there's just an additional mandate to check the transitions as well.
All right, maybe we will take another two question. I think one of the question here is how much can we be sure that the published version in April will be quite close to the FD's version? I guess that's something not everyone can definitely confirm, but let's hear from you, Dana.
Actually, um, historically speaking, if it's already in the final draft international standard, there will just be some grammatical changes or cosmetic changes in the published standard. But I can't say as of now because again, it's still within the technical working group, the technical committee. So I can't confirm nor deny anything about this, but hopefully there aren't that big of there are no big changes coming from the FDIS 14001. Don't worry, if there are, it will be part of our training courses again.
All right. We still have some time, so I'll pick another two question.
Mm-hmm.
Is documented information availability pertains to either document or record? Because since in the 2026 version, the word retain or and maintain has been removed. So how will we know if document or record is needed?
Yeah, that's the thing about ISO, no? It actually has from documents and records, it became maintain documented information, retain documented information. So now, ISO 14001 asks you to keep documents, make them available, keep records, make them available. So, the two are now integrated into one documented information, and all both of them needs to be made available. Okay.
All right, the last question. What stronger leadership involvement do you see during the changes of the new version in terms of accountability?
Well, what I can see now is that it becomes more forward looking. So coming from um now it has now an expanded view of our environmental impacts, as well as it now asks us to have results from our management review rather than output. So
Mhm.
um for leadership, I still they still need I think there's a more, how do I say this, more opportunities for them to get involved or be involved with the implementation of your ISO 14001.
We
Okay.
still have time, so let's do one more. Interesting. So, related to the same question on leadership, can you demonstrate or maybe share an example how top management ensures that environment objectives are integrated into the organization overall strategic planning and decision-making process?
It will really depend, no, on how it can be shown. But as we have said, your objectives should always be linked to your context of the organization. So a lot of times there are some organizations, they include their sustainability commitments as part of their overall strategic planning, and it trickles down to their environmental management system. So that's one example. Another is, for example, if let's say financial, they would want to reduce cost, no? So they've included reduction of energy consumption or energy savings as part of their objectives, and it is still part of your environmental management system. So that's one way to look at it. Okay. Uh-huh. You have no mic, Shuin?
We still have a few questions unanswered, but I think what we can do, Dana, is probably we compile them into a Q&A document,
Mm-mm.
get the responses all organized, and share back with all our participants as well. I think that will benefit you. You can also refer back.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Dana, for your insightful sharing. Thank you, all participants, for your time today. But before you leave our webinar, I will appreciate if you just take a minute to respond to our poll so that we can get back to you, especially if you would like a representative from BSI to contact you further. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everyone.